I'm the king of the world. Titanic wasn't just a love story set against history's most famous maritime disaster, it was a production catastrophe that nearly sank its own studio, a dangerous experiment that hospitalized its cast, and a director's obsession that transformed Hollywood forever. Picture this: over 50 crew members rushed to the emergency room after being mysteriously poisoned. Kate Winslet chipping bones and developing pneumonia. Three stuntmen breaking bones while Cameron pushed them to their limits. A budget that exploded from 120 million to 200 million, making executives panic that they'd greenlit the most expensive disaster in film history. This wasn't just movie making, it was survival. Today, we're diving deep into 20 weird facts about Titanic that reveal the chaos, danger, and sheer madness behind Cameron's masterpiece. And stick around until the end, because the bonus fact involves a mysterious hand that fooled millions of viewers worldwide. Ready to go below deck? Let's dive in. James Cameron actually went down to the real Titanic 12 times. James Cameron didn't just research the Titanic disaster, he lived it. The director made 12 actual dives to the wreck site, 2.5 miles below the Atlantic Ocean. Each descent took 2.5 hours just to reach the bottom, and Cameron spent more time on the actual Titanic than most of the ship's passengers ever did. During his first dive, he was so goal-oriented that he barely looked around. But by his final visits, he found himself overwhelmed by the emotional weight of seeing personal belongings scattered across the ocean floor. Cameron later described these dives as transformative experiences that shaped every decision he made about the film. The real footage you see in the movie, that's Cameron himself operating the cameras in one of the most dangerous filming environments imaginable. Over 50 people were hospitalized after someone poisoned the crew's soup. This sounds like something out of a thriller, but it really happened. While filming in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, an angry crew member laced the catering soup with PCP, a dangerous dissociative drug. Cameron and over 50 cast and crew members were rushed to the hospital after consuming the contaminated food. Cameron managed to induce vomiting before the drug took full effect, but others weren't so lucky. People were hallucinating, disoriented, and genuinely feared for their safety. The production shut down for days while investigators tried to identify the culprit. They never caught whoever was responsible. Cameron later admitted this incident made him paranoid about food safety on all his future productions. The fact that someone was so frustrated with the filming conditions that they resorted to poisoning their colleagues reveals just how intense and brutal this production really was. The movie's runtime matches the exact time it took for the real ship to sink. Cameron obsessed over historical accuracy to an almost supernatural degree. The film runs exactly 2 hours and 40 minutes, precisely the amount of time it took for the real Titanic to sink after hitting the iceberg. But it doesn't stop there. The collision scene with the iceberg lasts exactly 37 seconds in the movie, matching historical accounts of how long the actual impact lasted. Cameron studied survivor testimonies, maritime records, and engineering reports to ensure these timing details were perfect. This wasn't coincidence, it was calculated obsession. Cameron wanted audiences to experience the disaster in real time, to feel the weight of those final hours as the passengers did. Every minute of screen time represented a minute of real terror experienced by 2,224 people aboard the ship. It's a haunting reminder that what we're watching isn't just entertainment, it's a carefully constructed memorial to one of history's greatest tragedies. Kate Winslet nearly drowned and suffered multiple injuries. Kate Winslet endured more physical trauma making this movie than most action stars do in their entire careers. She chipped a bone in her elbow during filming and later admitted she genuinely feared she would drown while shooting in the massive 17-million-gallon tank. The water scenes were particularly brutal. Winslet spent hours submerged in freezing water that was maintained at a temperature that would induce hypothermia to maintain the illusion of the North Atlantic. She developed pneumonia from prolonged exposure to the cold water and had to be hospitalized multiple times during production. But perhaps most tellingly, Winslet later admitted she was more afraid of Cameron than she was of drowning. The director's reputation for demanding perfection regardless of personal cost was so intense that cast members feared disappointing him more than they feared physical injury. Winslet's commitment to the role was absolute, but it came at a devastating personal cost. Leonardo DiCaprio's iconic drawing scene used James Cameron's hand. One of the film's most intimate and iconic scenes contains a secret that fooled millions of viewers. When Jack draws Rose wearing only the Heart of the Ocean necklace, it's not actually Leonardo DiCaprio's hand holding the charcoal. DiCaprio isn't particularly skilled at drawing, so Cameron, who is an accomplished artist, stepped in as a hand double. But there was a problem. DiCaprio is right-handed, while Cameron is left-handed. The solution? Cameron drew the sketch with his left hand, and the entire scene was filmed in reverse, then flipped in post-production to make it appear as if a right-handed person was drawing. The actual sketch of Rose that appears in the film was also created by Cameron himself. So when you watch that scene, you're seeing Cameron's artistic skills and hand movements just disguised as DiCaprio's. This attention to detail extended to every aspect of the production. Cameron wouldn't settle for anything less than perfection, even if it meant personally performing the most intimate scenes in the film. The production was so brutal that crew members started quitting. The filming conditions on Titanic were so extreme that the production began hemorrhaging crew members. Multiple department heads walked off the set, unable to cope with Cameron's demanding schedule and the dangerous working conditions. 3 stuntmen broke bones during the shoot, and the casualty rate became so high that it resembled an actual disaster. The original shooting schedule of 138 days exploded to 160 days, with no end in sight. Cast members were spending 12 to 14 hours in cold water, developing hypothermia, infections, and exhaustion-related illnesses. The Mexican location shoot became notorious in Hollywood as one of the most physically punishing productions ever attempted. Cameron's reputation as the scariest man in Hollywood was cemented during this period. Workers complained that his perfectionism crossed the line into obsession, with some crew members comparing the experience to military boot camp rather than filmmaking. Those who stayed did so out of professional pride, but the human cost was enormous. The budget exploded from $120 million to $200 million, causing studio panic. What started as an expensive but manageable production quickly spiraled into the most costly film ever made at that time. The budget ballooned from $120 million to over $200 million, sending 20th Century Fox executives into full panic mode. Studio chiefs began demanding emergency meetings with Cameron, insisting he cut an entire hour from the 3-hour rough cut they were seeing. They calculated that a shorter film meant more daily showings and higher profits. Cameron refused, leading to heated confrontations with studio executives who were convinced they were funding the biggest disaster in film history. The production delays and cost overruns became entertainment industry legend, with trade publications running weekly stories about the troubled production. Some Fox executives privately discussed pulling the plug entirely, cutting their losses and releasing whatever footage they had. The studio's stock price actually fluctuated based on Titanic production reports. Cameron later admitted he was prepared to return his director's fee to help cover costs, but the studio never took him up on the offer. My Heart Will Go On was almost cut from the movie. The song that defined Titanic and became one of the best-selling singles of all time almost never existed. Cameron adamantly opposed having any pop songs in his historical epic, believing they would undermine the film's authenticity. Composer James Horner went behind Cameron's back, secretly collaborating with lyricist Will Jennings to create the song. Horner then convinced Celine Dion to record a demo, though she was initially reluctant. Her manager-husband, René Angelil, had to persuade her to give it a chance. Horner waited for the perfect moment to ambush Cameron with the finished song, playing it during a late-night editing session when the director was exhausted and potentially more receptive. Cameron listened to it multiple times, initially resistant, but gradually won over by the song's emotional power. Even then, Cameron insisted the song only appear during the end credits, not as a featured element of the film. That compromise song went on to win the Academy Award, a Golden Globe, and sell over 18 million copies worldwide. The cast trained with full-time etiquette coaches to learn 1912 manners. Cameron's obsession with historical accuracy extended to hiring a full-time etiquette expert to teach the entire cast, including extras, how to behave like Edwardian-era aristocrats. The coach instructed actors on proper posture, table manners, and social protocols specific to 1912 upper-class society. They learned how ladies should hold their skirts while climbing stairs, how gentlemen should escort women, and the subtle social cues that indicated class status. Even background performers underwent this training because Cameron insisted that every person visible on screen should move and behave authentically. The coaching sessions became so detailed that actors learned period-appropriate dancing, card game rules, and even how to properly smoke cigarettes using 1912 techniques. Despite this intensive preparation, film critics still spotted anachronisms, modern mannerisms, and behaviors that occasionally slipped through. The training was so comprehensive that many cast members said they found themselves unconsciously using Edwardian manners in their daily lives months after filming wrapped. The famous sinking scene was so dangerous it nearly killed multiple actors. Go ahead and like and subscribe because what I'm about to tell you will change how you watch the movie's most famous scene forever. The climactic sinking sequence wasn't just movie magic, it was a controlled disaster that put hundreds of lives at risk. Cameron constructed a massive hydraulic tilting set that could rotate the ship deck to simulate the Titanic's final moments. But when the set tilted, actors weren't just sliding down fake surfaces, they were genuinely falling, crashing into solid steel structures and getting seriously injured. Multiple cast members suffered broken bones when they couldn't control their falls during the tilting sequences. Some actors struck the ship's structures so hard they ruptured internal organs. The extras weren't trained stunt performers. They were regular actors suddenly dealing with genuinely life-threatening conditions. Cameron used real water flooding across the tilting decks, creating unpredictable currents and undertows that swept people off their feet. Several actors had to be pulled unconscious from the water tanks. The production medics were on constant standby, treating injuries that ranged from severe bruising to concussions. What audiences see as thrilling cinema was actually a series of barely controlled accidents that could have resulted in multiple fatalities. Cameron built a 775-foot replica ship that cost more than most entire movies. The Titanic replica built in Rosarito, Mexico, wasn't just a set piece, it was essentially a floating city that cost more than most Hollywood productions. The ship stretched 775 feet long, making it one of the largest practical sets ever constructed. Cameron insisted on building it to nearly full scale, complete with functional interiors, working elevators, and authentic period details down to the doorknobs and wallpaper patterns. The construction required its own harbor, with massive cranes and engineering equipment that transformed the Mexican coastline. Over 100 craftsmen worked for months, creating period-accurate furnishings, from the grand staircase to the third-class dining rooms. The ship could actually tilt and flood sections on command, using sophisticated hydraulic systems that controlled water flow and structural movement. Local Mexican workers became expert shipbuilders, mastering techniques that hadn't been used since the original Titanic's construction. The set was so authentic that maritime historians used it to test theories about the real ship's design and sinking mechanics. The elderly couple in bed during the sinking were real Titanic victims. One of the film's most heartbreaking moments depicts an elderly couple lying in bed, holding each other as water floods their cabin. These weren't fictional characters, they were Isidore and Ida Strauss, the real-life owners of Macy's department store who died on the Titanic. Historical records show that Ida was offered a seat on a lifeboat but refused, choosing to stay with her husband. Her last recorded words were, "Where you go, I go," the same line Rose speaks to Jack in the film. Cameron researched dozens of passenger stories, incorporating real people and their final moments into his fictional narrative. The Strausses had been married for over 40 years and were traveling back from Europe when disaster struck. Their love story became one of the most documented romances of the disaster, inspiring poems, songs, and memorials. Cameron cast the scene with actors who physically resembled the historical figures, and their final moments on screen closely match survivor accounts of the couple's last hours together. Kate Winslet's nude scene was filmed on her first day to break the ice. Cameron deliberately scheduled Winslet's nude drawing scene for her very first day of filming, believing it would eliminate any remaining awkwardness between her and DiCaprio. The strategy was to get the most potentially uncomfortable scene out of the way immediately, so the actors could build their relationship without that tension hanging over them. Winslet later admitted she was terrified, not just about the nudity, but about working with Cameron for the first time. The scene required multiple takes and different angles, with Winslet spending hours partially clothed on a freezing set. DiCaprio was equally nervous, having to direct intimate conversation while maintaining professional composure. Cameron's approach worked. Both actors said the experience bonded them and made everything else feel easy by comparison. The scene became one of the film's most iconic moments, but it was born from a director's calculated psychological strategy rather than natural story progression. Winslet's trust in Cameron's vision was established from day one, though she later described the experience as throwing yourself off a cliff professionally. The movie used more water than some small towns. Titanic's water scenes required logistical planning that resembled a major municipal project. The production used over 17 million gallons of water for various flooding sequences, enough to supply some small towns for months. Multiple massive tanks were constructed, including one that could hold 5 million gallons and was deep enough to fully submerge multi-story set pieces. The water management system included pumps, filtration systems, and heating elements to control temperature and quality. Cameron insisted on using heated water for actor safety, but maintaining warm temperatures in such massive volumes required industrial-grade equipment. The water scenes were filmed in sequence over weeks, with the same water being recirculated and treated between takes. Special effects crews had to calculate water pressure, flow rates, and safety protocols that would prevent drowning while creating realistic flooding effects. The environmental impact was significant enough that the production hired specialists to manage water usage and ensure proper disposal. The complexity of managing this much water while maintaining film quality and actor safety was unprecedented in cinema history. DiCaprio's famous "I'm the king of the world" line was completely improvised. The film's most quoted line wasn't in Cameron's script. It was pure DiCaprio spontaneity. During filming of the ship's bow sequence, DiCaprio was supposed to deliver specific dialogue, but he was so caught up in the moment and the spectacular setting that he shouted the now famous line instead. Cameron loved it immediately, recognizing that DiCaprio had captured something authentic and joyful that scripted dialogue couldn't match. The line perfectly embodied Jack's character, a young man overwhelmed by possibilities and freedom, standing on the greatest ship ever built. DiCaprio later said the line came from feeling genuinely exhilarated by the massive set and the ocean views. The crew burst into applause when he delivered it, and Cameron knew immediately they had captured something special. The line became so iconic that it's now synonymous with the film itself, proving that sometimes the best moments in cinema come from actors following their instincts rather than their scripts. It's particularly poignant knowing that Jack's feeling of conquering the world would be so short-lived. Cameron fired the original music composer before hiring James Horner. Before James Horner created the film's legendary score, Cameron had hired another composer who was fired after delivering unsatisfactory work. The original composer struggled to capture the emotional scope Cameron envisioned, creating music that felt generic rather than epic. Cameron's decision to fire him and start over added months to post-production and significant costs to an already over-budget film. Horner was brought in with an impossibly tight deadline, having to compose over 3 hours of music in just a few months. The pressure was enormous. Horner had to create themes that would support both intimate love scenes and massive disaster sequences. He worked virtually around the clock, often sleeping in his studio to maximize composing time. Horner's approach combined traditional orchestral elements with Celtic influences and modern synthesizers, creating a unique sound that complemented the film's blend of historical authenticity and contemporary storytelling. The score became one of the most recognizable in film history, but it almost didn't exist due to Cameron's perfectionist standards and willingness to start over when something wasn't working. The real heart of the ocean was worth more than some cast members' salaries. The blue diamond necklace that drives much of the film's plot was based on the real Hope Diamond, but the movie version was created by jeweler Harry Winston at a cost of $1 million. The prop was so valuable that it required its own security detail and insurance policy during filming. Multiple versions were created, some with real diamonds for close-up shots, and others with cubic zirconia for action sequences where the jewelry might be damaged. The necklace became so famous that it spawned a jewelry craze, with replicas selling worldwide. Cameron insisted on authentic period jewelry throughout the film, hiring historical consultants to ensure every piece matched 1912 styles and social status indicators. The attention to detail extended to wedding rings, pocket watches, and costume jewelry worn by extras. Some of the period pieces used in the film were actual antiques borrowed from museums and private collectors. The heart of the ocean's fictional story was inspired by real jewelry lost on the Titanic, including pieces that have never been recovered from the ocean floor. Celine Dion initially refused to record "My Heart Will Go On." The song that became Titanic's signature almost never happened because Celine Dion hated it on first hearing. When composer James Horner approached her to record the demo, Dion thought the song was too cheesy and melodramatic for her taste. She was at the peak of her career and worried that such an obviously commercial ballad might damage her artistic credibility. Her husband and manager, René Angelil, had to convince her to at least record a demo version, arguing that the song's emotional power could transcend its commercial appeal. Dion reluctantly agreed to record it in one take, assuming it would never be used. When she heard the finished version with full orchestration, she began to understand the song's potential. Even then, she was surprised when it became such a massive hit, ultimately selling over 18 million copies and winning every major music award. The song's success transformed Dion from a primarily francophone artist to a global superstar, though she initially saw it as a compromise of her artistic vision. The movie's success saved 20th Century Fox from potential bankruptcy. While Fox executives were panicking about Titanic's exploding budget, they had no idea they were funding what would become their financial salvation. The studio was struggling with other expensive flops and was genuinely concerned that Titanic might bankrupt them. Internal memos revealed that some executives discussed selling the project to another studio to minimize losses. The film's initial tracking suggested it might underperform, with test audiences responding lukewarmly to early previews. Fox's stock price dropped as production costs mounted and release dates were delayed. Some industry analysts predicted the film would be a career-ending disaster for both Cameron and the studio. Instead, Titanic became the highest-grossing film of all time, earning over $2 billion worldwide and single-handedly revitalizing Fox's finances. The success was so unexpected that it changed how studios approached big-budget filmmaking, proving that audiences would embrace expensive, ambitious productions if they delivered emotional satisfaction. Fox's near bankruptcy transformed into record profits, all because they trusted Cameron's expensive vision when logic suggested they should cut their losses. Cameron actually hit an iceberg during location scouting. In one of the most surreal coincidences in film history, Cameron's research vessel actually struck an iceberg while scouting locations in the North Atlantic. The ship was damaged, but not seriously, and no one was injured. Cameron later said the experience gave him a visceral understanding of how, suddenly and quietly, such collisions could occur. The incident happened during night filming of the actual Titanic wreck, when visibility was extremely limited and ice conditions were treacherous. The ship's crew had to perform emergency repairs in the middle of the ocean, using techniques that hadn't changed much since 1912. Cameron was filming at the time and captured some of the emergency response, though none of this footage made it into the final film. The director said the experience taught him to respect the ocean's power and unpredictability in ways that no amount of research could have provided. It also reinforced his belief that the original Titanic disaster was as much about environmental conditions and human error as it was about design flaws. The coincidence seemed almost supernatural to the crew, as if the ocean itself was testing their worthiness to tell this story. The famous handprint on the car window wasn't Kate Winslet's. Here's the secret that will change how you see the film's steamiest scene forever. When Rose places her hand against the fogged car window during her passionate encounter with Jack, it wasn't actually Kate Winslet's hand, it was a male crew member's. The scene required multiple takes and precise timing, and the hand placement had to match specific lighting and camera angles. Winslet's hand wasn't the right size or shape for the shot Cameron envisioned, so he used a stand-in with hands that would photograph better against the glass. The crew member's hand was filmed separately and composited into the scene during post-production. This tiny detail required hours of technical work to achieve, but Cameron believed it was essential for the scene's visual impact. The handprint became one of the film's most iconic images, appearing on posters and merchandise worldwide. Millions of viewers have tried to recreate that exact handprint, never knowing they're imitating a male grip artist rather than Rose herself. It's a perfect example of Cameron's obsession with visual perfection, even in the most intimate moments. 27 years later, Titanic remains a masterpiece of ambition over reason, a director's impossible dream that somehow became reality through sheer force of will and staggering human cost. Cameron didn't just make a movie about a disaster, he created one, then transformed it into the most successful film of its era. The real story behind Titanic proves that sometimes the most beautiful art emerges from the most chaotic circumstances. What do you think about these behind-the-scenes secrets? Drop a comment below and let me know which fact shocked you the most. And if you want more deep dives into Hollywood's hidden stories, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. After all, we're just getting started exploring the iceberg of secrets that Hollywood keeps hidden beneath the surface.